I'll introduce our panel in a second. They're very excited to share their thoughts with you and their experiences with you, but a couple of housekeeping messages just so that you have them up front. In case you miss anything, this webinar will be recorded. It is complimentary to anyone who registered that archive or to our members, and it's posted on our training page, which I will give you the URL to in just a few moments. We expect it to be the archive to be posted early next week, and we'll send you an email when it's ready. Should you have any questions today, we do ask you to use the question feature to help us hear those questions, or to get those questions. They'll all come to me, and then when we are at the end of our presentation, I'll act as a facilitator and a moderator and share them, and hopefully we can expand our learning beyond the presentations. If you run into any technical issues, raise your hand using the hand raising feature, not literally, unless somebody else is in the room with you today, and that would be wonderful because we love getting as many people on the line as we can. And I will send a message to you that only you can see, and we'll try to troubleshoot it together. Certainly want to make sure you get the most out of this experience today. And a couple other things about Aphasia Access. There's a lot of great things going on that you might be interested in. Our next webinar is about a month away, and you can learn more about that at aphasiaaccess.org/webinars. We're finalizing the panel now, and hopefully we'll have that posted in the coming days. More to check out more there. I think you'll find a lot of interesting information. Beyond the webinars, Aphasia Access also offers training videos and educational videos to help y'all sharpen your skills, and also to educate those in the community and the people you serve about aphasia and the LPAA. They are all on aphasiaaccess.org/training as well. A final thought to share with you is that if you'd like to continue the conversation, a great way to do that is our online peer-to-peer networking community, which you can log on through aphasiaaccess.org, and with that, pose questions, share reactions, insights, and just extend the learning beyond the 75 minutes that we have available to us on this Thursday afternoon. With that, and no further ado, because I know I'm not the reason y'all are on the line today, I'll take a minute to introduce our speakers in total, and then we will turn it over to the presentations. Our first presentation will be coming from Professor Robert Marshall at the University of Kentucky. Dr. Marshall has been a speech-language pathologist for over 50 years, with a number of stops across the country, giving him a unique perspective on aphasia care. Those stops include the University of Rhode Island, the Department of Veteran Affairs Medical Center in Portland, Oregon, and now at the University of Kentucky. On the research side, he is a previous North American editor of Aphasiology and is currently an associate editor for the Journal of Speech, Language, and Hearing Research. At the University of Kentucky, he directs their aphasia program, which provides services to people with aphasia and has been integrated into the university's aphasia course. After we hear from Dr. Marshall, we'll actually have a panel presentation of two folks from the University of Western Michigan up in Kalamazoo. Sandra Glista is one of our two panelists from Western Michigan. She began her career at the Rehabilitation Institute of Chicago, and today she directs the Aphasia Communication Enhancement Program at Western Michigan. She's an ASHA Fellow, a recipient of the ASHA Foundation Outstanding Clinical Achievement Award, and honors of the Michigan Speech Language Hearing Association. And we love her even more because she proudly serves on our Education and Research Committee, which is doing many great things right now that we're looking forward to telling you about in the coming weeks and months ahead. Joining Sandra on her panel will be Robin Pollens, who is a clinical supervisor at Western Michigan. In that role, she's responsible for graduate student supervision and program development for the Aphasia Communication Enhancement Program. Of note, she has published and lectured in the areas of palliative and hospice care, ethics, interpersonal collaboration, and expanded models of care for individuals with people on aphasia. In service to her local community, she serves on the Committee of Ethics for the Michigan Speech Language and Hearing Association. After we hear from Sandra and Robin, our final speaker today will be Darlene Williamson. who proudly notes that she was a life participation approach to aphasia gal, her words, when she was running her clinic at the George Washington University in Washington, D.C., the U.S. Capitol. She really saw the need for her students to understand the importance of looking at the big picture of recovery in order to live life successfully with aphasia. She did her undergraduate work at Purdue University and did her postgrad at the University of Illinois. She has over 30 years of experience in all levels of post-stroke care and currently serves as the president of the board of the National Aphasia Association, making us more than happy to welcome her on so many different levels, and to have this small collaboration with the NAA today, I think, is even better. So that's about it. This is the point where I really want to stop talking so you can hear all the exciting things our speakers have planned for you. So now we are going to turn it over to our first presenter, and I'm going to walk each of our presenters through the process of getting you on the line. Professor Marsh, can you hear me? Are we making waves in Kentucky? Sandy or Robin, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Wonderful. I seem to have a little bit of a technical issue. Could we perhaps improvise a little and let you all dive in while I sort it out?
You sure can. Can you see our screen now?
I'm going to shift it right over to you so that you have it. Bear with me 1 second. The ball is coming to you. I see your screen. It looks very good.
And are you seeing the screen only without the control panel? Do I need to erase the control panel?
No, we don't get to see the magic behind the curtain, and that's a beautiful thing.
All right, so we're good to go?
You're good to go.
All right, well, thank you very much. Thank you for this invitation. It's given Robin and me a chance to sit down and actually talk to each other about what we've been doing and what we've really been doing as a team for the past almost 15 years. We're telling you our disclaimers. We're both employed by Western Michigan University, and I am a volunteer member of the Aphasia Access Education Committee, and Robin also does work in various settings in the medical community here in Kalamazoo. We're really just very, very fortunate to have been introduced to thinking about people with aphasia and with people who have aphasia in groups and meaningful content ever since we entered the profession. For me, my roots can be linked to thinking about functional communication and learning the functional communication profile that Martha Taylor Sarno was inventing and working with in the 50s and 60s. Fortunately for me, too, when I moved to Michigan and began my career at Western Michigan University, aphasia groups had already been going on here since the 60s. And so groups and people with aphasia have really always gone together in my mind. And today, it goes together with every graduate student's mind who studies speech-language pathology here at Western. We have 10 graduate students with us every term. And so all 30 of our graduate students work with us, and 25 to 35 people with aphasia and their caregivers in every semester.
And this is Robin Pollens. And I first met and worked with people with aphasia in the context of community as a student in the late 70s at the residential aphasia program at University of Michigan. I then worked for many years in home health. And when I enter a person's home, I am participating in that person's life. If a woman with aphasia was sad because she could no longer participate in her caring circle at church, then the content of therapy was to be able to copy phrases onto get well cards to send to her church members. So when the life participation approach to aphasia emerged, it was a natural fit for me.
And so we have learned lessons from people with aphasia. We've learned lessons from graduate students, and we've really learned from each other. And we've tried to capture today some of these lessons over the past 30 to 40 years to guide us about what to talk about today in these just short minutes. And we've summed it up into what are 5 principles that we think guide us as we make decisions about content.
How do we listen so that we can truly hear what clients and families want? Because what we do together with people with aphasia starts from our ability to listen to that person and their family to guide what we do together. And then the content is then limited only by one's imagination. We engage our clients, ask their opinions, and use choices. We may use questionnaires or communication diaries or aphasia-friendly products that probe the impact of living with aphasia. And on a program level, we have had advisory boards or focus groups and certainly caregiver questionnaires. For example, one year the caregivers wanted to do yoga for relaxation, and we had weekly chair yoga sessions for them. Or another time they wanted to learn CPR. The key question is, what's one thing that will make a difference? Here is an example of a visual survey. We ask, what do you want to do next? Do you want to join a group to plan a way to teach others about aphasia? Or do you really want to work on your spelling? Our range of clients grew through the years. Some were very young, others were of very recent onset, and we learned to be flexible in our content. When we ask the question, what would make a difference in your life? The answers are sometimes surprising. One family member somewhat hesitantly shared that she wished her husband could be more continent. The brainstorming we did together resulted in the goal of teaching her husband to use a gesture to request toileting. But the content of the therapy unfolded into a gesture Uno group, where gestures functional for each person became part of the game. This individual told us that he wanted to learn to email to be connected with family. So using the Who ICF model, we asked the questions, what barriers need to be addressed? Does he have impairments in the area of reading and spelling or typing? How about participation barriers? How can we create the opportunity for him to be able to email with others? Or environmental barriers? Could he access the internet in his home? Our email group was formed, and we could address all of these parameters. A second principle we've learned is to be open to discovery. When we enter into a relationship with a person with aphasia and their family, the content becomes dynamic. As an example, we often don't know the content of the groups until we sit down and listen to the client's ideas. In some of our groups, our clients have prepared and delivered a presentation about aphasia for our university police officers, or taught each other iPhone games which promoted spelling, or laughed and told jokes that they chose and read orally. Where did these ideas come from? Sometimes the ideas emerge from the group members organically. And while communication groups provide the opportunity for conversation and camaraderie, we have also found that skills-based talking, listening, reading, writing, or augmentative treatment approaches can be targeted specifically within the participation content. Life changes, personal factors change, and we can respond to the client's needs. For example, this was a client who At one point, he needed to be able to access the public transportation system. So in treatment, he worked on generating and rehearsing verbal scripts so that he could call to reserve the rides. Later, he wanted to volunteer as a community board member. So the treatment content evolved to where he was listening to narratives and taking notes and asking questions, thinking about what are the communication tasks that are needed to be able to sit at a board meeting and participate. Later on, this gentleman needed to get a new apartment. And so the content of his treatment was to have him create written directions in how to navigate a phone app and how to search for apartments. The content could address each of these new participation goals and at the same time increase his language competency.
We're also guided about content by thinking how we can widen the circle, and by that we mean bring community resources into our content and into our program, or bring our clients into the community. Over the years, we've worked with many different community organizations. We've worked to try to find a match for our clients and their interests. For example, when we had an individual with aphasia who really wanted to volunteer in the community and really volunteer in an art-related project, she matched with a volunteer from the senior service organization, and they became volunteer partners. Together, for many years, they served as assistants in a third grade art classroom. Another one of these volunteers from senior services became a bowling partner to someone who had aphasia who lived in a group home and otherwise wouldn't have gotten out in the community. Many years we've capitalized on the public library's common book read. We've been able to connect with the library to ensure that people with limited language abilities, people with aphasia, could enjoy the book in a variety of modes, that they could attend related events in the community and discuss it among peers, so that they're enjoying the book that everybody else in the community is reading. When we think about content, we're also always really trying to think about what's enjoyable, what's satisfying. What can be those pleasurable moments that maybe really bring someone who has aphasia into flow, into those moments when you can forget that the language disability is present. So for example, when we had Chihuly come to Kalamazoo and the glass exhibit was here in our Art Institute, we were able to have the docent be trained to be able to come and let our members be able to enjoy the exhibit. We also really try to take advantage of the opportunity that nature can give us for pleasurable moments outside. And it gives us an additional method of letting the clients and caregivers and students learn about how to manage issues of physical accessibility and not just communication accessibility. When we have faculty from holistic health and art therapy participate with us, we find that we have opportunities we never knew could be part of our content. In these images, you can see participants, caregivers, and people with aphasia alike creating a mural of strength that Robin, who you see in the health fair, exhibited as part of a project to bring information to the community, and that it emphasized from the holistic health perspective using art therapy to emphasize messages of resilience, which our members then decided to turn into cards and sell. So we had money for the program to do more and more art. Ultimately, whatever we do in content in any given semester, we're always really trying to be thinking, how does this activity? How does this content affirm our foundations and our principles of wanting to see folks be able to build their self-worth, build their identity and personhood, and to be able to teach graduate clinicians that this is a value of our work. One way we do accomplish this goal through content is to also think about the life story and the narrative that everyone wants to tell. And so we see these stories of resilience, these stories of triumph become the content of the group, the content of therapy for some individual folks. For example, when StoryCorps came to our city as a city event to document things and people of importance in our community, one of our clients with aphasia created her story and became part of the StoryCorps preservation. The links that will be available to you here in this particular slideshow will take you to her story and the recording of it.
This is when I affirm that the content of our ACE program is meaningful. These are a few comments that clients have told me recently. One caregiver said, "This is the time in the week when I can be with families who know what it's like." And a client told me, "When I come to ACE, I am respected." And somebody else said, "This is where I can take time to say what I mean and people listen." Or when I think of individuals who have come to us initially quiet, tearful, or in shock over life's change, and over time appear in our clinic with smiles, engagement, accomplishments, and hope.
We're not alone in this work. We work with some very supportive people, particularly other clinical supervisors in the Van Riper Clinic. We acknowledge them. We acknowledge their contribution to this program. It is clearly a team effort at the Aphasia Communication Enhancement Program. And we thank you for having just these few minutes to talk with you about how we think about content. Back to you, Todd.
I'm here. Can you hear me, Sandra?
Yeah, I sure can.
Wonderful. That sounds good then. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts on the topic. I know everyone very much appreciates it. Professor Marshall, are you able to hear us now?
I can hear you okay. Can you hear me?
We can hear you wonderfully, and thank you for your perseverance to get through to us today. We've been very much looking forward to your thoughts. I'm going to go through the process of setting you up as the presenter if you're ready to go.
Okay, I'm ready to go.
All right.
Do I need to click on my slides?
One moment.
Okay.
You should be getting a screen popping up asking you to accept the presenting role.
Yeah, I do. So, do I push on show my screen? It says show my screen. Please close confidential window. You're the presenter. Go to the webinar. That's what I do? Can you still hear me?
We can hear you loud and clear, and we're seeing your screen.
Okay.
If you'd like to pull up your PowerPoint at this point.
Okay, will do. Okay, there we go.
Wonderful.
Okay, want to go to slideshow?
Sure.
Okay, here we go. Okay, shall I start?
Please do.
Okay. My name is Bob Marshall. I'm a professor at the University of Kentucky, and we're talking about the art of creating content within the life participation approach for aphasia. So, When I took my first aphasia class as a doctoral student in 1966, that's a long time ago, about 50 years, Hilda Schul had just published her classic text, Aphasia in Adults. Schul's message was pretty simple. It was that aphasia was a general language deficit caused by brain damage, best treated by intensive auditory stimulation, practice and drill, and eliciting lots and lots of responses to stimuli that were deemed to be adequate. There was little mention of the fact that we use language to be social, or that aphasia was a chronic condition. When I finished my PhD in 1969, I got my first real job as the chief of the Speech Pathology and Audiology Service at the VA Medical Center in Portland, Oregon. I came out as a new PhD, and like new PhDs, I was full of myself. And I took that title of chief very, very seriously. I remember distinctly a couple of aha moments that year that made me think about what I had learned about doing aphasia therapy. One of those aha moments came up with a man named Mr. Hansen. Mr. Hansen was a man with severe aphasia that, before meeting me, had been treated by a friend of the family who was a public school therapist. Mr. Hansen's wife reported that Christine was wonderful because she talked to Mr. Hansen about his grandchildren and his rock collection. Stifling a big yuck, I told Mrs. Hansen, "Your husband doesn't need conversation. He needs intensive auditory stimulation," and I proceeded to go to work. After a rather lackluster therapy session that exhausted and depressed Mr. Hansen, his wife told me, kind of confidentially, "Dr. Marshall, you may know a lot about aphasia, but you don't know very much about people." Another aha moment came just a few months later when I journeyed over to a community speech and hearing clinic where the aphasiologist in residence was Dr. Mackenzie Buck, Bill Buck, actually, that's what we called him. He was a former University of Florida professor who had had a stroke and recovered from it sufficiently to write a book and actually reinvent his career in communication disorders from being an expert in craniofacial anomalies to being an aphasia therapist. I was kind of taken back when Bill took me into his therapy room, and I saw that it lacked the ambience created by the traditional table, 2 chairs, whiteboard, and mirror. Rather, it was a small, fully furnished apartment with living room, kitchen, bathroom, and bedroom. Dr. Buck smugly told me, "I set it up this way because the patients communicate better in this environment." While the aha moments made me think a little bit, shook me up a little bit, what has affected me most, I think, in thinking about the therapeutic content for the life participation approach has been the good fortune of being able to develop a long-term perspective. If you are lucky enough to follow patients for years rather than days, weeks, or months, you share the patient's triumphs and tragedies, likes and dislikes, and what is important. This cannot help but shape content of therapy in LPAA. Not surprisingly, what one learns is important in aphasia class becomes secondary to doing the collaborative problem solving needed to address a patient's activity limitations and participation restrictions. Let me give you an example. Mr. H is a current patient of mine. He's wheelchair bound, and when we were working together about a year ago, he wanted to use his aphasia as an excuse for not walking down the aisle on his daughter's wedding day because he was self-conscious about the way he looked. This devastated and depressed him, but he was not able to see that his aphasia had little to do with his problem of walking down the aisle. Therapeutic content then for Mr. H for a few sessions centered on how to solve this problem and why it was important for him to do so. As a consequence, Mr. H bought a new suit, his son pushed him down the aisle in a stylish wheelchair right beside his daughter, and they marched right up to the altar as a group. So with that introduction, let me share with you some of the things I feel are important to creating content within the life participation approach for aphasia. First of all, to create content, you must connect with the individual with aphasia, and sometimes those people that are members of that patient's social network. How you connect and the strength and longevity of your connection will be determined by when you encounter the patient with aphasia on the journey from the ER to a point where they can fit aphasia into their life successfully. Like the instructions for the PICA suggest, connecting may be hard or it may be easy, but connect you must. To create content, not only does one need to connect with the patient, but it's also necessary to establish a relationship at a mutually agreeable level and at a depth to facilitate the personalization of treatment. At a basic level, I favor Eisenstein's definition of language therapy as a relationship between the clinician and the patient, where there is agreement that improvement in communication is the purpose and the goal. I think, however, clinician-patient relationships need to go beyond the basic. And I have no shame in telling you that some of my patients have become my friends, and I feel blessed that our lives have intersected. But I must warn you that connecting with a patient and establishing a relationship is not easy. It takes time. It is not for the faint-hearted. And because connecting takes time, I fear, I guess I should say, that our role as communication specialists is being threatened in acute and subacute settings because clinicians find it easier to allow themselves to be swallowed up rather than to take the time to connect. To create content and to support the therapeutic relationship, it is also necessary for the patient to understand that therapy is a two-way street. To ensure this happens, we clinicians must take pains to be sure that the patient and the family know that therapy is not where they go to get fixed or passively acted upon by the therapist. We need not to present ourselves as teacher or doctor, but rather as collaborative problem solvers. The patient and or the family, or perhaps both, must understand the importance of bringing something to the table, whether it be to the group or to the individual session. That something may be a request as simple as wanting to talk on the phone to one's child, or as complex as convincing a former employer one is ready to go back to work. But it is that something that is the content of therapy. To create content, we need slices of the patient's life and to focus on serious language. Making the therapeutic relationship collaborative and ensuring the patient is doing his part, however, is a challenge. What is done in therapy makes no difference unless the client does something outside of therapy. Planning for generalization is what it's all about. For my students in my aphasia clinic, I stress that they spend their hour working on something that is solely intended to get the patient to do something outside of the therapy room on his or her own. Interestingly enough, I'm not alone in this regard. Bellini, in working with her patients with voice disorders, asks them when they come in for their therapy session if they have done their assigned exercises when she begins the treatment session. If the client says he hasn't done it or he's forgotten, she says she dismisses him from the session and she asks him to call back and schedule the next session when he has done the required homework and exercises. Kind of makes you wonder a little bit, doesn't it? Paying attention to content created by the therapist is absolutely necessary to identify and select outcome measures to validate the benefits of LPAA. I'm in complete agreement with the AFROM paper that stresses the importance of counting what counts. From my point of view, at least for patients with chronic aphasia, the benefits of LPAA can best be captured with measures of social validation, first-hand reports from satisfied clients, and results from qualitative research, perhaps using grounded theory approaches, to look at changes over the long and not necessarily the short haul. Because LPAA is socially motivated, its content is vital. We have to be sure what we do with the patient has relevance to life, and this necessitates individualized treatment for all, and eschews one side individualized, not discounting group, but individualized meaning geared for that person, and eschews one-size-fit-all approaches that are promoted so much in the aphasia treatment literature. Let's look a little bit at how LPAA approach and its content relate to broad goals of aphasia therapy. Now, I like these goals, and I use these all the time, but these are goals that were clearly articulated by Rosenbeck, LaPointe, and Wirtz in their 1989 book, Aphasia, A Clinical Approach. I think these are still relevant today. Their goals were to restore as much communication as the patient's damaged system allows, to help the patient compensate as best possible for his deficits, and help the patient in terms with the way things are from the way they were. If you think about it, these goals are not incompatible with the major components of the World Health Organization model that emphasizes treating impairment-based, activity-limiting, and participation-restricting consequences of chronic conditions such as aphasia simultaneously and holistically. And if you think a little bit more, they're not out of sync with life participation approach goals to maximize function by supporting the patient and family, directing them to appropriate resources, and instilling in them the courage to reflect the competence masked by their aphasia, or minimizing activity limitations through collaborative problem solving, or increasing participation using partner training schemes, barrier removal, and advocacy. I think when we think about it, the goals of aphasia therapy are just fine. It's how we go about achieving them that we differ. We are still struggling with questions such as the following. Should we use socially motivated or theoretically driven approaches? What's the best indicator for a patient that a patient has benefited from treatment? Some form of social validation or averaging some changes reflected on an fMRI scan across many patients. Do we choose to treat in the short term, which is what we have done for a long time, which is usually less than a year, or do we treat in the long term? If you're listening to this webinar and you're a participant, you probably have some answers to these questions of your own. When I started my little short presentation here, I shared with you that my position on creating content has been shaped by looking at patients over time. Here's my simple explanation. I know my patients. They are not part of my lab. Labs are for rats. My patients are people, and many of them are my friends. I listen with all my heart to what they tell me, and I try to use that as content. Let me close with my What About Bob story. And forgive me if you've heard or read my story before. There was a man named Bob in my high-level aphasia group who was a widower of about 3 years' duration. Bob was 67, prosperous, good-looking, and lonely. His 35-year-old marriage had left him clueless about how to meet a woman. And in our group, we concocted an ad for the men wanting to meet women section of a local paper. And we persuaded Bob to run that ad. He did, and he received many replies to the ad. In our group, we had an absolute blast discussing the responses, determining how Bob might respond, if Bob should respond, and how he should deal with the touchy subject of his stroke and mild aphasia. The upshoot of this story was that Bob married one of the responders to his ad. I don't know if Bob is living happily ever after, but I can tell you that Bob stimulated me to write my own ad, and that was the way I happened to meet my wife. So thank you for listening.
Thank you, Dr. Marshall. We very much appreciate you sharing your thoughts. It's time for our third presenter. And with that, I will ask Darlene if she can hear me.
Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
I can hear you wonderfully, Darlene. Thank you for that audio check. I'm going to go through the process right now. You should be getting the messages that you have control of the screen that everyone is seeing.
Okay. Everybody see it?
We do, and we have shifted to your PowerPoint.
Okay, so I'm good to go.
Indeed.
Hello, everybody, and thank you for logging in and listening today, whether you're live or whether you're going to listen to this through the archives. And thank you for my fellow panelists for the information. I think there's a commonality that runs through this, and I think it will become evident as I speak a little more. So you'll see that I got a little bit cutesy with my slides for this presentation. Everything that I'm going to mention today begins with a C. So this is what I'm going to talk about today. A little bit of clarification, a few core elements of what we've learned here at the Stroke Comeback Center, some focus on content. I want to talk a little bit about cohesion and confidence, and then this coexistence of the social and the therapeutic model, which Dr. Marshall's already mentioned so well. Okay, so just by way of clarification, I am the director of the Stroke Comeback Center. We began operating in 2005. When they reached out to me to do this presentation, one of the things I said was I filed to begin this in 2001, and it took me 4 years of planning to get this place opened. And if I knew now if I knew then what I know now, I wouldn't have waited 4 years. I would have just taken the lead, and because so much of what has happened has evolved because of our members, and so I wouldn't have tried to have planned every detail. I would have just let them plan things. But at any rate, that's how it happened. We are a nonprofit. We're a freestanding community-based center. People are welcome to come to us for as long as they feel they're receiving benefit, and we do charge some fees, but if you're unable to pay, we raise scholarship funds. We operate under a life participation approach model, and we have since day one. A little bit of the nitty-gritty. We conduct 45 different groups a week here around the various aspects of communication. As an aside, we have fitness and yoga groups also, but we set a menu of groups. People pick and choose whether they want to do a writing group, a book club, a technology group, a verb group, a parts of speech group, an all-talk group, which is what we call our constraint-induced language therapy. And they can sort of self-build their own rehab program based on that. So virtually everything here is done in groups. And we have about 117 people a week who come to attend our sessions. So just as a point of clarification and grounding, that's where our content and everything that I'm going to mention today comes from. So a few core elements of groups. These are probably the three biggest FAQs that I get whenever I present about groups of any kind. What do What have you found to be the best size of group? How about the length of group? And do you group your people together? Oh my gosh, there's a typo. That's homogeneous versus heterogeneous. Sorry. How do you group your people? Sorry about that typo. Okay, so size of group. The literature would tell us that 5 participants is the optimum number. I would say that it somewhat depends on the purpose of the group, and I'm going to talk just a little bit in just a minute more about the purpose of groups. But our writing groups can sometimes handle more than 5. It depends on the makeup of the group. Sometimes if the members are higher level communicators, they can handle 6 or 7 and still have an adequate opportunity to participate. Our guideline is not to exceed 6 unless the people in the group agree that they feel comfortable with more people joining them. So again, the literature would say 5 for a 1-hour group in order to give adequate time for communication. We set 6 as our limit. Sometimes we exceed it. 60 minutes, I think most people do a 60-minute group. We take a 15-minute break between groups. But we do have some 90-minute groups. Those folks who are lower-level communicators and need more support and use multimodal means of communication, we like to run 90-minute groups really to give them adequate opportunity to not only meet the goal of for the day of that group, but to participate and sometimes call caregivers in so that they're able to carry this outside of the group session. Now I have another typo, sorry. So homogeneous versus heterogeneous. We pretty much have homogeneous grouping here. Why? Because I think it equalizes the turn taking. It standardizes the use of the supports that we use during our groups, and it provides for better peer support and peer modeling. But there are a collection of groups, so Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, all homogeneous. On Thursday, we run heterogeneous groups. Our technology groups can manage heterogeneous grouping, constraint-induced groups, and some of the other language parameter groups can sometimes manage various levels of communicators. So the lesson learned here, 5 or 6 members, you can vary the length of the group depending upon the tolerance and the purpose of the group. And then there are variations in whether you use homogeneous groups and heterogeneous groups. I fully realize that some folks working out there don't have a choice but to do heterogeneous grouping, and that's okay. It can be very valuable. So the content. Here's my message here. We feel very strongly that groups need a structure and a purpose. Our groups follow this format. We start with a little bit of socializing. We feel that's a very important piece of every group because people come together on a weekly basis. They need to tell you what's been going on in their life. We need that to sort of build this group cohesion. Then we build context. And then we do some solid work for 30 to 40 minutes, and then we use what we've learned in that group for an additional 10 minutes. And by the way, Dr. Marshall, this came from a presentation that you did at an ASHA convention with Roberta Ellman and Audrey Holland and a couple of other people a long, long, long time ago when you passed out handouts, and I kept that handout for many years, and that's what we base it on. I think having a consistent structure allows everybody who comes to the group to feel comfortable, that they know what's going to happen to them, they participate in the flow, they know what's coming, there's no surprises. It directs the issues to the beginning of the group so that people are not dwelling on personal issues later on, and that ending part allows for carryover of strategies and vocabulary. It's really critical that the purpose of the group is specified. If you're not in a situation where you're running multiple groups the way we are, it's very clear what our purpose is. But everyone around the table needs to know that they're coming together to communicate with peers so that they, within a condition of structure, and that they're going to get support, that they're going to learn strategies, they're going to have an opportunity to practice them, and they're going to learn from their peers and get criticized by their peers, by the way. And certainly groups have a psychosocial benefit. No one's going to disagree with that. All right, so the content can be topical or theme-based. Participants should feel like the content of the group meets their needs, whether it's very specific language content or whether it's a conversation group and they have asked to talk about a specific content. So structure promotes successful outcomes, and if you have a purpose, it promotes cohesion. So I want to say a couple of words about cohesion. I'm picking up the pace so we can get done and have time for questions. We became interested in this a couple of years ago. There's a lot written about this in the psych literature. And here's a definition that comes directly from the psych literature. I have these references at the end of my PowerPoint. I don't need to read it to you. But what I would like to say is that the research has shown that when there is a high degree of cohesiveness in the group, you have a positive outcome. I don't think that that is earth-shattering news, but you really have to feel that people are in a coherent situation in order to feel very positive about what the group, their participation in the group, and what it does for them. And I pulled up this one study from Aphasiology that shows that when that your well-being is really enhanced when people are motivated and really feel that they're tied to the other members in the group, and there's a high level of cohesion. So how do we achieve that? Prepare, set the structure of the group, as I just talked about. The role of the leader needs to be defined, feedback needs to happen, modeling needs to happen, and members need to be emotionally invested and be able to express their emotions. Now, coexistence. I threw this PowerPoint in recently because, well, last week somebody asked me the question, is Stroke Comeback Center operate under a therapy model or a social model? And I've always kind of said that we're a hybrid. All of the clinicians who work here, including me, come from a medical model background. We're all fairly rabid about, providing good, solid content. But I don't think the two are mutually exclusive. Going into a group that has a focus and a purpose does have social outcomes, and it's a natural consequence of getting people together into a survivor community. And that's one of the biggest lessons that I've learned through the Stroke Comeback Center, that we didn't have to artificially create social opportunities. They just happen as a consequence of people coming together. And sometimes not in the way you predict, but it's okay. And then confidence. We believe that confidence is arguably the most consistent and maybe the most promising outcome from the content that goes on in a life participation philosophy. Don't we all know that if we have confidence, we can take the world on, and so can people with aphasia? So enough said about that. So let me put this in a capsule. Here's a few thoughts. Prepare, have a structured group, and then get out of the way and let that group take care of itself. It will, I can promise you. The best group leaders know that this is their role, to provide some sort of predictable structure, sort of mediate some of the relationships, encourage them to help each other, encourage them to take risks in group, and know that no matter how good a group leader is, no matter how experienced they are, it really gets down to people, peers are really the most powerful tool in a group, and anyone that runs groups knows that. And so that's it. Good. We finished right on time.
Wonderful. Thank you, Darlene. So appreciated. As I get everything set back up here, folks, if anyone has a question, it's a great time to share it using our question function. We do have one or two, which I'll grab in just a moment here. As I'm doing that too, one other, just that last housekeeping reminder that it's a great opportunity for you to continue the conversation afterwards on Aphasia Access's peer-to-peer community, which you can get by logging into our website, aphasiaaccess.org. So I'm going to now take the control back to me and show my screen and take that up. Hopefully everybody's seeing a nice little PowerPoint at this point. And the question that we do have, someone wrote, so appreciate Western Michigan and your efforts to build collaborations outside of the broader, or in the broader community rather, and outside the wall, not just the walls of where your programs happen. Wondering if you've had success or any insight you could give folks about finding funding for this type of partnership, university or institution and community partners.
Well, that's always a good question of how we find funding. I think what we have been looking for are ways to link to the community where there are already existing resources, and simply to point out to the community agencies that the people who we're working with, the people who have aphasia, are people who, if we wanted to, we could say, all right, these are folks who do have disabilities, who have language disabilities, therefore they should have equal access to whatever the service might be. It could be at the Art Institute in terms of the docents, or at the library in terms of access to programming. But we also want to look at where there is common mission. And that's how I think we were able to link with the Senior Services Volunteer Program and other volunteer programs in the community, because their mission is to find volunteers and to place volunteers. Ours is, and one year we did have a whole group that was focused on how do you find a volunteer activity and what's a good match for me as a person with aphasia. So we haven't.
Can I chime in here, even though it was a question for Sandy?
We just haven't gotten extra funding. We've looked for what are existing resources.
Of course, Darlene, if you'd like to add on your thoughts, we'd love them.
I'm sorry, Sandy. I thought you had finished. I just wanted to say, when we go out into the community, we typically don't have funding the first time. Sandy, maybe you find this too, but once you take a group out and expose whatever community facility you're going to, then you better be sure they're going to get a follow-up visit from me. They say, oh, this was great, we loved it, our employees loved it. Whole Foods is an example. We did a little project with Whole Foods, and they said, we love this, and I said, well, how about funding it so that A, we could come back here, or B, we could go to a different Whole Foods, or we could go to other places out and about in our community if you provide us with some funding. And they did. So we find that we, sort of make that inroad first and then sadly go back and ask for money.
Wonderful. Thank you, Darlene. One other question, if anyone would like to tackle it. All four of you work really at the intersection of the LPAA and aphasia care, and I wonder if there's a trend or something on the horizon that you think is the something worth watching, something that will be coming on the scene in the next year as everyone on the line attempts to strengthen and expand their use of the LPA and its core principles. Looking forward, is there a thought on your mind you might want to share with folks from your perspective?
Well, I'll go ahead and take this first, maybe, and then you, my colleagues, can join in. I wish I had something very concrete to say. I feel like the birth of the organization Aphasia Access, that's kind of what their purpose is it not? I gave a presentation yesterday at the University of Maryland and asked how many, and it was faculty and students, how many people had heard about life participation approach to aphasia, and a couple of faculty hands went up, and that's it. So if I could put something, a bright sun on the horizon, it would be that this starts at the level of student training.
Sure.
And I can speak to that certainly because on the other side, the students who are in my class and who are in our clinic are eager to be working using this as a foundation, using life participation approach to aphasia as a foundation for their work. And they are hoping we can be successful in creating opportunities and in allowing this to become the way that they can practice.
And I think because there is a transition time with some people familiar and some less familiar, I also try to give the students some examples of, let's say you're working somewhere and your supervisor, since there'll be new clinicians, suggest you do this type of therapy. How can you think about it in terms of life participation? How can you, if you're told, have your client name 10 items, 10 fruit, how can you think about, well, I know this client really loves carpentry. Maybe we can talk about tools. So ways that they could bring some of the ideas that we've been talking about and how they might impact when they are out in the field, even if they're working with other people that may not be quite as familiar with these ideas. And I also try to give examples, even though it's an aphasia practicum, of how these ideas of life participation also apply whether they're working with someone with dysarthria or someone with voice, because it really is just a shift of how you relate and think about what you're doing in therapy. We haven't gotten to hear back from students. Maybe Sandy has, I shouldn't say that. What happens when they do go out and how they put this all together when they are out and practicing with varying approaches.
Gosh.
We'll talk about it sometime,
yeah, we'll
Sandy.
Talk about
okay,
that.
back to you out there.
Yeah, I think we have a topic for a future webinar right in that. I have time for one more question, and that question is, the question for the presenters, how do you set individual goals for members in a conversation group? Is it a collaborative process? How do they measure up? How do they measure and change goals? How about for members who are long-term members?
Boy, we do this all the time because we are in a teaching clinic. We're really trying to straddle the demands of teaching students how to think about goals, how to write goals, how to observe what's going on, how to write meaningful goals, smarter goals, if you will, to use Linda Worrell's words, And it is what we really do is talk about what is the group goal of having conversation or deciding to make a presentation to the police or whatever it is they're going to do as a group. But then also, what does each individual person want to do? And in some groups, that's very overt, that everybody else knows what everybody else's goals are. In others, it's maybe more covert, but that the goal can be.
I could give an example.
And Robin says she has an example.
Let's say if the group is together, they're going to be writing a newsletter, putting together a newsletter. So the group's whole goal is to be able to participate in the creation of a newsletter. One of the clients might be working on a goal of learning to navigate the computer, whereas somebody else may be learning strategies for improving his spelling. So within the context of the group, they might have this overall participation goal that's shared, but they may have some individual impairment-based goals that they're working on also.
I would just say, I would tag on to what they said. Very similar situation here at Stroke Comeback, in that we say our goals are self-determined, and people decide what their goals are. They, in collaboration with the professionals, of course, but if they have a particular goal, they bring it to group, and just as Sandy indicated, everyone in the group knows what the other's goals are, so we encourage them to just put that right out, that my goal this 9 weeks, we work in 9-week sessions. This goal, my 9 weeks, is to improve my use of pronouns, or maybe just throw that in as an example. Everyone around the table knows that, and those same folks come together every week, and they give feedback, and, oh, you're not using the right pronoun. So we do some few little standardized measures here and there based on what people have set their goals as, but people decide what their goals are. They frequently need help, but then it's very much a collaborative effort in the group. Everybody knows what the wish or the dream of the individual participant is.
Wonderful. Thank you. If our presenters have any other comments, I'd love to give you the mic one last time. Otherwise, I think we're about at the right point to thank everyone and release everyone back to their day and the good work that we're all doing in the field.
Thank you for listening.
Yes, thank you all for listening. We're grateful to have had you. We'll send out some information about the archives so that you have this as a reference, and also so that you can share within your communities. And of course, if we can ever do anything, please don't hesitate to let us know. This concludes the second webinar of our 2016 series, Aphasia, What I Know Now That I Wish I Knew Then, the Art of Creating Content. Hope everyone has a wonderful day.